This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me on my website at hikingbob.com. That has links to everything: social media, photography, podcasts, columns at the Indy, whatever the heck else I do, newsletters, emails, contact me, anything you want to do, Hiking Bob. You know, it's just easier that way. All my social media, all that stuff is on there at hikingbob.com. And today with me is my co-host, Wild Westendorf.
Hey everyone, it's Kevin Wild Westendorf here, and you can find me at my website, www.wildwestendorf.com, where I recently posted a blog post about my time on Mount Whitney. So if you want to see even more pictures than what I put on Instagram and Facebook, is there with more detailed information, especially a whole paragraph about going number 2 on the mountain. So
You know what? People probably don't think about that, but eventually it's got to come up. How do I do that?
Yeah, exactly. And you can also find me on social media, primarily on Facebook and Instagram at Wild Westendorf.
Awesome, Kevin. Well, and you've got some great news. You announced today that you got you said it wasn't exactly a promotion, but you're moving to a whole different aspect of your job. Tell us about that. I think it's real exciting what you're doing.
So as most of you may know or remember, but if you don't, I work at Care and Share Food Bank, and we serve the southern half of Colorado. So our network is huge, and I've been there for 6 years and 1 month now, and the majority of my time there has been throughout a couple different roles where I just got a promotion a couple times, but it was always in the distribution center or the program side of things. Where now I will be actually out and about in the community driving our mobile market truck, just going to areas that are food deserts, are being underserved, or retirement homes of low-income seniors, and especially the very important part are the rural areas, which is much, much harder to travel around and tend to not have grocery stores and such.
Yeah, there's some place out there where it's few and far between a long way between grocery stores.
Miles and miles and miles, yeah. So my role is to help fill in that gap, and we have future plans to go to very rural areas in terms of like the La Junta area or Durango, Four Corners. And yeah, we're just going to expand this program. It's been going on for a couple years now, but we're finally getting more funding to like upgrade the trucks and get more food in. And I'm not sure how soon that happens or comes in. I'm not at that level. I'm very, very excited to start doing this and just make come as a shock to you all, but I like being outside. So it's going to be really nice. So I'm not stuck in a warehouse or the office. It's been fine working there. I love the crew there. But yeah, it's just be nice to be outside more.
So is it just one truck you guys have, or you have more than one?
We have one that's based out of Pueblo too.
Okay.
To go more to the south and southwest part of the state, but its focus is Pueblo County plus the various other ones around there too.
Cool. And so are you going to be actually on the road, or are you going to be coordinating things?
I'm doing both.
Okay. So. Cool. Well, congratulations. I think it's a great job. I love the work Care and Share does, making sure people get food, and that's important, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
And like many other things, food availability is not necessarily equitable across various demographics and stuff. So it's good that you guys are out there doing that, and it's great work you're doing. So congratulations on you for getting that, and I know you're going to love it. You're going to have a blast. You have to get a CDL license to drive that thing around?
No, it's actually just barely underway for that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but if we do upgrade it with a refrigerator unit, then yeah, I'll have to go into training for that.
If we get a commercial license. Okay, cool.
And yeah, if any of our listeners are ever in need, just stuff happens, car breaks down, you lose your job, someone gets sick, or you just have a bunch of kids and they're a pain in the butt to feed all the time. You can always go on careandshare.org and click on the top where it says find food, and you can look for a pantry that's nearby, but if there is not one, you can scroll down to find the mobile market schedule.
Awesome. Great. That's awesome. I'm glad you got that. That's a good job for you, and I think it's a great thing that they do. So
Thank you.
Congratulations.
I'm very, very excited about it.
Kevin, we're going to talk about something technical today. So we're trying not to do it in a way that bores the daylights out of everybody. I wrote a column 2 weeks ago about my favorite 10-mile hikes. And I did a lot of those. They were all hikes I've done. You know, I don't necessarily write about hikes I haven't done. They're all hikes I did. And some of those hikes I've done multiple times. And some of them I've done with different GPSs over the years. And I also did them as routes on COTREX so I can share them with people, the States Trail Explorer. And so I can share them with people. Say, yes, instead of me trying to describe this, here's the route, because you can make those routes public, and then you provide a link and anybody can go up there and pull them up and look at them. But I did note on there that it was my experience that the States app underestimates mileage. And I came to that after looking at my mileage on my GPS and the mileage that the state mapped out. And that created a little bit of discussion about how do you know which is right and stuff like that. Okay, fair enough. Okay, so let's start over. For people who are not sure about how GPS works, number one, if you're looking at GPS on your cell phone, it has nothing to do with your cell signal. The only thing your cell signal may have anything to do with is whether that GPS displays itself on a map.
Correct.
So if you're driving and you're using Google Maps, you need a cell signal to get the map, but the GPS location has nothing to do with your cell signal. Having said that, there are some things that use known Wi-Fi locations to kind of fine-tune your location. So if they know a Wi-Fi is at a specific location and you're picking up that Wi-Fi signal, it may fine-tune it a little bit. But none of that happens unless you have a GPS signal. So let's start with that. And what happens is there is a bunch of satellites up in the sky, and they send out a signal. And your GPS receives those signals. Now, you need multiple signals for your GPS to work. And you need to be able to see multiple satellites. The receiver has to be, and your GPS will show you how many satellites it's actually seeing and receiving and how many are in the sky above you. And it's a timing thing. So the GPS sounds out a signal at a specific time. The satellite sends out a signal. Your GPS receives it, and it knows that. And once you get several of those signals, when it knows how long it took from that satellite to get to your receiver, and I'm very greatly simplifying this, not because I want to dumb it down, because that's the only way I get it.
Yeah, because I know it actually uses the theory of relativity to account for the speed of the Earth moving, plus the speed of the satellites moving, where they're going. Like, there's just a ton of math. And so once I saw that it was using Einstein's equation, I was like, okay, that's enough I need to know.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Yep, and you're talking to somebody here who, if I didn't have software, couldn't balance my checkbook. So this math is way over my head. But I know enough about to know how it works. So what happens is when it receives all these signals, it's able to calculate your location by knowing where the satellites were and how long it took for those signals to get from the satellite to. And those signals, by the way, are very low power. I think they're like 50-watt signals, and they're coming from thousands of miles away. So it's a miracle you can even receive them in something that's in your hand. And that's how it calculates it. Now, when I use my GPS, and I'm using right now, I've been using for a couple of years now, a Garmin Oregon 750T. Before that, I used a Model 450T. So a couple generations difference in there. Typically in Colorado, when I'm using my GPS, when I turn it on, I look at what I'm looking at is a GPS accuracy measured in feet. So it knows by all the GPS signals it's getting how accurate you're going to be. And typically, I don't start my hike until it gets down to about 10 feet. So I'm accurate within a 10-foot radius. 10-foot radius is smaller than most rooms, except maybe your bathroom.
Yeah.
So it's a 10-foot radius. When I'm in the desert in Arizona, I often get single-digit accuracy because obviously wide open, no trees, nothing like that. It gets a bunch of signals. But here in Colorado, it gets about 10 feet of accuracy. So it's pretty accurate. There's also more than one GPS system. We have our own in the U.S. The Russians have one. The Europeans have one. The Japanese have a GPS system. The Chinese do, although I don't know that anybody's actually using their signals other than them. So you can be receiving more than one set of satellites. You may be receiving 2 U.S. satellites and a European one. They're all circling around up there like space junk, just circling around there so you can receive. So you may be receiving multiple ones. You need at least 4 to get a decent location.
4 satellites?
4 satellite signals. Now, they may only be using 4 at a time, but you can be receiving like 10 or 15. And that may shift, which ones are. But in any case, you can maintain 10 feet of accuracy. There are a couple things that changes that. Since it's all based on timing, if you're deep in a canyon, your accuracy is going to go way out because that signal that's coming down into that canyon is going to bounce off the walls of the canyon, throwing its timing off. Because it's instead of going from the satellite to your GPS, it's going to bounce off this wall, bounce off that wall, come to you. And your accuracy may end up being 40 feet or 30 feet or 100 feet. Your accuracy is going to be way off. When you first turn on the GPS, it takes a couple. The 750T locks in at 10 feet accuracy in about a minute and a half. My 450T took about 3 or 4 minutes. So I had to turn it on when I first got to the place, change my boots, get my pack on, do all that stuff, make sure it's accurate.
Oh, yeah.
So that's how I track my satellite. That's how I track my hikes. When I get home, I then plug in, and we have it set up here. Of course, you can't see this. I hope to be able to do a YouTube video on how I do this. I plug this into my computer, and I use a piece of software called Expert GPS. A really good software. I've been using it for years. And it has topo maps on it, street maps on it, aerial maps. You can also put aerial photos. You can actually put in your own maps on there. You can do all kinds of stuff with it.
Oh, that's cool.
It actually needs to know exactly which GPS you're using. So I'm not sure if that's because interfaces change, although I don't think it does. I think Garmin uses one, Magellan uses one. There's different. But I think that it also knows how good the receivers are in those GPSs. And then it displays it on a map, and it does some error calculating. It also figures in elevation, because if you're going on a map is two-dimensional, so everything's a straight line. But as we know here especially, you're not walking in a straight flat line, you're walking up a hill. So that's obviously a further distance. Think of it as a triangle. You're working up a further distance than if you're walking on a straight line. It calculates that. I think it also does a little error calculating. It know that maybe on this hike you had 10 feet of accuracy, and it calculates down. So typically what I see on my GPS when I'm on a hike and what it downloads to on this Expert GPS is a little different. So for example, for today's hike that I did out in the Buffalo Creek area, it was 7.9 miles as shown on Expert GPS, but the GPS itself was showing 8.05 miles. So a little difference there. Some error correcting going on and things like that. So one of the comments was that your GPS tends to over-exaggerate your mileage, which as we saw here, it does. It showed, when I was doing the hike, it showed 8.05. But the software corrects it. It came down to 7.9. So then I was talking about how COTREX, in my opinion, underestimates mileage a little bit. That doesn't make it a bad piece of software. It's going to get you in the ballpark. It's not like it's going to tell you it's a 4-mile hike and it's going to turn out to be an 8-mile hike, but it may turn out to be a 3.8-mile hike or something like that. So during today's hike, there was a trail intersection that I got to, and they had fairly new signs. And I will tell you, this hike went from a Jefferson County park into a national forest and then back into the Jefferson County park. At this trail intersection, there was a sign there that said the distance to the park boundary was 2 miles. I looked at my GPS, and it just turned out it was reading exactly 5.00 miles. Okay. I hiked down this trail. When I get to the park boundary, my GPS was showing 7.00 miles. So that sign was accurate. The sign said 2 miles. My GPS agreed, said 2 miles. When I plotted that distance on COTREX on my phone, it was showing 1.7 miles. So obviously it was off a bit. So that tends to kind of reinforce that I think my GPS is going to be, for my purposes, more accurate than what COTREX is. COTREX is still great for planning. It's the way to go for planning, but if you created a route or you measured a distance on COTREX, and then you zoomed in on it, you can see in a lot of places where it cuts short. It cuts across corners in some areas. I guess they can only make it so accurate and make it still something relatively portable. So in some places it cuts corners. Where my GPS is set up for the maximum rate of updates. So it's updating a lot, like several times a minute. It's updating. So it doesn't shortcut a curve. It's actually going to measure that curve because it's updating so fast. All that stuff comes into play. So that's where I came to the conclusion that I'm going to assume that my GPS is going to be more accurate than what COTREX is saying. Some of the trails that I've done that I listed in that article, especially like the one around Dome Rock, I've measured that with the 450T and the 750T, and they're pretty close. I think the 750T is a much more accurate GPS. It's a modern one. It's more up to date. There's newer ones out that may or may not be more accurate. And all GPSs of a certain era are all going to be pretty much the same accuracy. The low-end Garmin that's $160 or whatever is going to be as accurate as the one I use now. The difference is going to be touchscreen, size of the screen, resolution of the screen, maps you may or may not have in there, how high resolution. There's going to be things like that. They're all going to have kind of the same accuracy, however. The other thing, and I always tell people that these things, that I wrote in the column, your mileage may vary. How you measure it, it's going to be different. If you're measuring with your phone, it's not necessarily going to be as accurate as with a standalone GPS. If you're measuring with your watch, like I've got a watch with a GPS, you have one with a GPS, they're not necessarily going to be as accurate. Obviously, they cannot have as antenna. A lot of it is just about antenna size. An antenna as big as what's in a standalone GPS. So your miles may vary. The only really, truly 100% accurate way to measure anything is to literally measure it on the ground.
Yeah.
And I'm actually seriously thinking about doing this, is getting one of those measuring wheels that they use for when they're surveying and stuff, and actually walking a trail with the measuring wheel. But the problem with that is that's not how anybody's going to measure anything when they're out hiking. They're going to use a GPS of some sort. So if I'm giving them GPS coordinate or GPS measurements, that's what they're going to be using. It may not be as accurate as measuring it literally physically on the ground, but that's what people are going to be using. So it makes sense to give them measurements based on the same thing they're going to be using. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Am I making that clear? I'm not sure I am, but...
Oh, yeah. And plus, I think unless if there's an actual science experiment being done, being off by a few feet, it's like in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge deal.
I can see anything within 10 feet of me, so I'm off by 10 feet. It's not going to scare me. Now, obviously, there are some instances where you have to be hyper accurate. If you're a surveyor and you're plotting property lines or where a building's going to go, you have to be hyper accurate. They've got fancy pants equipment.
And they know the science and engineering needed to make sure that it is extremely accurate.
Yeah, their measurements aren't accurate to within feet. They're typically they're accurate to within inches. They have to be. And if you want to carry the stuff they carry, have at it. But trust me, it's not going to be a little thing you clip to your backpack strap and wear with you. So that's where I've kind of come to this conclusion that I think COTREX underestimates mileage a little bit. Again, that's fine. You get you in the ballpark. You have a rough idea. Like I said, it's not going to tell you it's a 4-mile hike. It's going to turn into a 6-mile hike. It's just not going to do that.
Yeah.
It may tell you it's a 4-mile hike and maybe 4 1/4. Okay. That's kind of where I'm coming from with this. So some of the maps, when I did this article about my favorite 10-mile scenic hikes, so there were kind of two things going on there, 10 miles and scenic, I wrote in there that when you look at the route, it's going to say it's less than 10 miles. But I will say that I measured it with my GPS, and my GPS says it's this many miles. And I put that in the route that I linked to. I put it in the notes. My GPS said it's this many miles. Your mileage may vary. The other things that make a difference. What is the cloud cover that day? Believe it or not, that makes a difference. Is there a thunderstorm in the area? Electrical activity could interfere with the signal. Are you under heavy tree cover? Not a big deal here, but in some places, heavy tree cover can slow down the signal, throw off the timing, make a difference with that. just how your GPS is measuring things can make a difference with that. What your sample rate is set at can make it there. Do you have it set for the default, or did you actually go in the menu and set it for maximum sampling rate? All of that makes a difference. So when I say a hike is 10.6 miles and you come up with 10.4 or 10.8, don't yell at me.
Yeah.
And not that anybody has. I mean, I don't want to misrepresent this. Not that anybody's having an issue with this, but it was a question that came up and it deserves an answer. That's fine. But understand that we're dealing with radio signals from satellites that you're picking up with a thing the size of your cell phone or your cell phone or your watch.
Yeah.
And these signals, depending on the technology, how old your device is, all of these are going to make a little bit of a difference. So is my measurement going to be, you and I have hiked together, Kevin, and we've come up with different measurements. Yeah. Not terribly a lot, a little bit off here and there. But you're measuring it with your watch, and I'm measuring it with a GPS that's up on my chest, where it's going to get an unimpeded signal. Yours may be, on your wrist, which is going to be down lower. You may have your hand in your pocket off and on. Things are going to all make a difference. But I think this probably kind of explains how GPS works and why measurements can be, everybody's measurement can be. And I've hiked the same trail a number of times and come up with slightly different measurements. Well, maybe that day I was only getting 6 satellites instead of 10.
Yeah.
I was still getting 4 signals, but if one drops off and another one picks it up, that one may not, all kinds of things that are going to matter to how accurate these things are. I don't lose any sleep over it. Now, if I measure one and I'm way off, then something went wrong. The other thing I do with the software here, the software lets me edit the track. Trust me, it always results in less. Because if the way these GPSs work, I told you that I typically get about 10 feet of accuracy.
Yeah.
So if I'm standing in one place, I take my pack off and I'm sitting there and I'm going to spend 20 minutes having lunch. Every time that the GPS samples, there's 10 feet of accuracy. So at one point it could think I'm here. Then another time it's going to think I'm 10 feet this direction. Then another time it's going to think I'm 10 feet that direction. Another time it's going to be, you get what I'm saying? So when you look at it, you can tell where I stop because this is looks like a knotted tangle of string where that was. So typically I can do is I can cut that out, that little tangle, and draw a straight line between the two of them. That decreases the mileage because I'm making it more accurate. It's not measuring that. And sometimes I'll wander off and take pictures here and take pictures there, and I don't want to include that as my hike, so I'll cut those little spurs out and connect the dots where the trail was supposed to be. So I can tell you that I never increased my mileage. It just doesn't happen that way. And Kevin's looking at this now. You can see that this hike I did today, 8.05. But once it got downloaded in the software that I'm using, it's 7.9. That's actually what I'm going to log for my mileage. If I didn't do all this stuff, I would actually have many more miles on paper than I actually give myself credit for. I don't know. Does anybody really care? But I want people to understand that when I'm telling you this is the distance, it's not just me winging it. It's not me looking at my GPS. Again, this goes back to when we've talked about the equipment you have. Do you have your GPS? Do you know how to use it? Do you know how to look at that accuracy rate? If it's showing plus or minus 30 feet, wait a minute. Let that get a little bit more accurate before you take off because that's going to be way off.
Yeah.
Especially if you stay with that. Do you know how to read those things? Do you know how to understand do you know how to look at the satellite page and see how many satellites you're actually receiving?
And it's also very, very important to know how to change the settings in terms of, all right, there's this term in the settings that I'm not familiar with. What does this mean? Or, yeah, I want a super accurate reading because I'm training for a marathon. Right. So I need to know down to the seconds. So you can learn how to change how often your watch is pinged. To like every second, every 10 seconds. But it depends on how much life you want to save of the battery. Garmin has this feature called 3D speed and 3D distance. As opposed to like on device, it's supposed to adjust for distance and speed based on elevation.
Right.
So I have that turned on. Apparently that does reduce the battery life a tiny bit. So yeah, it's just important to find that balance based on what type of device. Now, if you have a device like what Bob has, it's very easy to swap out the battery. So you have that thing on full blast. Where I kind of want to save a little bit of battery on my watch, because I can still charge it as I go. It's just it's a bit of a hassle.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I set mine for the maximum sampling rate, most accurate, all that kind of stuff. Because for me, it's accuracy. And the battery in this thing lasts days.
Oh, yeah, because it's huge.
Yeah, and I carry spare AA's. It's got a rechargeable pack in it. I carry spare AA's. I can drop in there if I need to. And my portable battery pack will charge the device too at the same time. So all of these things matter in there. I've never had this thing run out of battery, even on very long 10, 12 mile, 11 mile hikes, anything like that. Never had the battery run out. It lasts all day. And I charge it up after every single use. When I get home, after I download it, I plug it into a charger. Fortunately, it takes like forever to charge. I didn't make this thing to be a fast charger. And charge everything out. So again, this wasn't a, I just wanted people to know that when it's a valid question, how do you know your GPS is accurately measuring stuff? Well, good question. And here's how I know. And I was telling Kevin earlier, my first GPS was a 4-channel GPS going back to the President Clinton administration when GPS was a fairly new thing. And at the time, GPS was created for the military. So let's get that out of the way. And at the time, civilians could own a GPS. What happened was the military put in this thing in the signals that reduced the accuracy unless your GPS could unscramble it. So military GPSs could decode this error rate and be within 10 feet. Civilian ones couldn't, so they were off by, 100 feet, way off. So they were really not all that great to use because you never could really be sure. Certainly if you're measuring a property line, you don't want to be off by 100 some odd feet.
Oh, yeah.
During the Clinton administration, he ordered the government the military to unscramble that signal. So everything at that time suddenly became as accurate as what the military had. Now the military has moved on. They have, hyper accurate GPSs. I don't know if it's the same signals or if it's a different constellation of satellites or they have something in there. This is how now when you're using driving and you're on your Google Maps on your phone, that when it tells you you're in front of the house, you're actually in front of the house you want to visit, not the one 4 houses down because you're off by 300 feet or something like that. So I've had GPSs since all the way back to then. So I've been using these things for a very long time. They've gotten more and more accurate. It's like anything else. The chips in them got better. They decode the signals faster. They pick up, more and more satellites have been launched, so they pick up more and more satellites. So they're measuring signals. When you're actually on either the east or west coast, you can actually pick up signals from markers that are out in the ocean that are at fixed locations.
Oh, okay.
And they actually, if you're close enough to the coast, you can actually pick up those signals with your GPS. Again, adding another layer of accuracy. There's all these things that go into account. So this is why my 750T is a little bit more accurate than my 450T. When I actually use both of them, I can compare the signals, and they're not off by a whole lot. But I think the 750T, especially when I look at the maps that download from, you see less anomalies on there where it spurs off and goes one way or the other. Where the 750T stays pretty much on track. So all these things take into account how well your GPS works. So if your mileage is a little different than mine, or it's a little different than Kevin's, or a little different than the person next to you, and you're using different devices, it could be one device interprets those signals a little different. But you're not going to be far off from everybody.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen because this is how they work, and everything, like with anything else, the newer they are, the better they are. So,
exactly.
So I hope that explains it. I will put a link in the show notes to a couple articles, one from NASA, which has a super simple explanation of how GPS works, another one from National Geographic, which goes into a little bit more detail. I think if I can find a decent Wikipedia, I'll get that out, Wikipedia post that has this information, I'll actually put that in there too. So you can read it for yourself and understand. I gave you a very simple, and I'm not saying it because I want to dumb it down. Everybody out here listening to this is a smart person, but you can get lost in the minutia of all the math like Kevin talked about. Kevin started talking about Einstein. I got lost. You can definitely get lost in that, but the very simple thing is it's signals from satellites. It measures the time it takes that signal to get you. It triangulates that. It interprets that to know where your location is. That's the very, very simple how it works. And that's good enough for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Same
With
here.
my very limited math skills, that's good enough for me. But that's how it works. I've been using them for a long time. I know how to interpret them. I know when they're giving me information that's not exactly accurate and take that into account. And I know that when I get that back and I download it, I may have to fix some things where it went off in one place or another, which happens a lot, especially, like I said, in canyons or narrow areas where that signal starts bouncing off a canyon wall. I know when I hiked down to the Grand Canyon, it was way off.
It was, because it was mostly fine until I was in the Bright Angel Canyon. Mm-hmm. That's when the signal got wild.
Yep. And new GPSs are getting better at that. I think they're kind of interpreting that there may be an error rate in there. Don't hold me to that. I'm just kind of guessing at some of this. But anyway, that's how that works. So how does it work on your car? So say you're using Google Maps and you're tracking. How does it know you're on the street and not on the sidewalk? Well, there's some issue there where, I shouldn't say issue, but what's happening there is it's knowing you're driving. You've told it you're driving. So it's automatically going to take that GPS signal, and then the GPS signal may be on the sidewalk, but well, he's driving, so he's on the street.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of, that's being done in the mapping software. Because you could be, especially if you're in a big city, a lot of skyscrapers, that's just like a canyon.
Exactly.
That signal is bouncing off of buildings and it's doing all that kind of stuff. Anyway, if I can figure out how to do this, I'll do a thing on, and I'm not going to do it, it's not going to be this week. I'll do a thing on YouTube where I'll actually show you how I download it, where the error correcting comes in, plug in my GPS. I have to figure out how to record the screen without just like holding a phone in front of it. There's a way to do that. Or, I mean, holding a GoPro in front of it or something like that.
It should be fairly easy to do it because I think it's built-in software.
It is
for Windows and Mac. So.
I'll just have to figure it out where it is.
Yeah.
So anyway, I hope that makes sense to everybody. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. And I'll be glad to share with you how I do this. The other thing I do is, this is why I use typically the exact same GPS all the time. There's sometimes I forget this one. I have the 450T in the Jeep. It's my backup. My backup is use my watch, but I recognize that it's not going to always be as accurate. But everything I do is measure with the new GPS. The 750T, it's not even new. It's actually not even a current model. It's a recent model, but not a current one. They've got newer models, and that's kind of how I do it. But you can do settings, change settings on it in the GPS itself, but it's easier to go plug it in the computer. There's software you can get. You can actually change it in the computer, and it then downloads those changes into the GPS. But it's also set for maximum sampling rate. Maximum being very, very often, like boom, 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 boom. It's constantly. Eats up more battery, makes those GPS tracks bigger files. That's okay. Two things, I've got a lot of room and battery, so I don't care. And all that stuff, is kind of how we do it.
And if anyone out there knows of good GPS mapping software for the Mac OS, let me know, because what Bob has is great, but it's not available on Mac, and I'm looking for desktop software, not an app on my phone. So
cool. So yeah, if you're using something out there for the Mac, let Kevin know. Preferably something that's below like $1 million.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Anyway, I hope that answered everybody's question. People have a right to know how I get this information, because presumably I publish these, here's a hike to go on and here's how many miles it is. I want them to be able to trust that I'm giving them accurate information. Here's how I get it. I'm not just winging it. And when I publish one of these hikes, in the paper, here's a hike you go on, I've done the hike.
Yeah.
So I've been out there on foot. I'm not trusting somebody else's data. There may be time when I'll tell you, if you go this way instead of this way, then this map says it's this many distance. But I'll tell you which ones, I make it very clear if I've done it or not done it. But if I write up a hike that I think people would enjoy, it's because I've done it and been out there on my own. Anybody can just drag out information from somewhere else. But
which is why you should never trust the distances on trails, on all trails. I think it's a great resource for finding trails, But when it comes to accuracy of elevation gain and distance, most of those are tracked using cell phone. And I know from personal experience, I'm sure you do too, that smartphones and cell phones just aren't as accurate as I'd like them to be.
And what are they doing with the data when they get out? Just reading it off the screen? Are they downloading it? Any error correcting going on? Are they editing the track to make sure? A lot of things going on there.
Yeah.
So much for that soapbox. Talking about that. I hope that's at least a little bit informative for people how that works. Kevin, you got anything you want to talk about? You got any hikes lately? Any good stuff you've done?
I'm planning on going back to Lost Creek Wilderness. I told this story a few years ago, but I went out there and did the Lost Creek Loop and accidentally read the map wrong and accidentally added it was like 10 or 12 miles to hike, and it was, yeah. So this time
Kevin didn't have his GPS.
Yeah. Oh, it was honestly just me being a dumb A word. Yeah. Got to keep this family friendly. But
yes, we have a clean rating. Let's keep it.
It was really just, it was a giant brain fart that I had. And it's just, a mistake I've never made since then, and I hope to never make again. But I'm planning on going back out there to do that loop properly. So I'm not trying to rush, and I'm not super exhausted and all that.
Not doing 30 miles.
Yeah.
Or whatever it was. Yeah. Don't do that. It's okay if you're planning. You were not equipped to spend the night or anything, were you? I mean,
No, I backpacked it, but
okay.
It was only going to be a 2-day trip.
That's right.
I had enough supplies and food to camp another night because I was tired, but I had no service, and I told everyone I would be back home by Sunday afternoon, and I didn't get back to my car till 10 o'clock at night, and then an hour and a half drive back home, and it was a mess. And from the point that I realized what my mistake was and how much longer I had to go, I went through a lot of stunningly beautiful areas that I just forgot to take photos of because I was just on a mission to finish the hike as soon as I can because I wanted to finish it before sunset. I completely missed that, and I had to hike a few hours in the dark, which is not fun. I mean, because of animals and such. So,
yeah, those little, when you turn on your flashlight and you see little dots looking back at you, what is that?
Which
a mountain lion or a raccoon?
I saw a pair of eyes in the swampy area. It moved like a small cat, so I'm assuming it was a bobcat or something. But
in the swampy area, it could have been an alligator.
Oh, yeah.
No, we don't have those here. And Kevin, one other thing, you did a thing on your Twitter feed about Ask Me Anonymous Questions, which I thought was pretty cool. And you had one about people asking about how you and I get along.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought your reply was good. And I followed up with a reply that, Kevin and I don't agree on a lot of things, but, we respect each other's opinions and how we get there. And the purpose of this podcast is outdoor recreation, and it's definitely something Kevin and I are on the same page with. And I just want to just extend that a little bit that, I asked Kevin what he wants to talk about, but I don't always expect Kevin to agree with me. And we've had a couple times when we were not necessarily on the same page.
Yeah.
So he's not here to be, and just make it clear, he's not here to be the yes guy.
Exactly.
For this. Kevin is free to express his opinion, and I always encourage him to do that and often ask him what he wants to talk about before. We do a little bit of prep before we sit down for this. But, the person who asked that, I thought it was a very good question, just like how I measure my tracks and stuff is a very good question. Appreciated Kevin's answer, and I threw in my own and, reinforced that, we're here to talk about a specific topic, and that's what we talk about. If you want to talk about socioeconomic topics, Kevin and I are going to diverge a little bit on that.
Yeah.
That's okay. That doesn't mean that we can't sit here on this podcast every once in a while and, at least be in somewhat of agreement, or maybe we're not always in agreement. That's fine too.
Yeah, 'cause I had responded saying like this, just the show is it's focused on hiking and the outdoors and recreation. So it wouldn't make sense for us to talk for 20 minutes about a current social economic issue. Like it doesn't make sense to do that. Because that's not the theme of the podcast. That's not what our audience is here for. Because I know if I listen to a movie podcast and they've randomly talked about the weather for 20 minutes, I'm like, okay, no, I started this episode so I could hear you talk about a movie.
Right, exactly. But it was a good question. I'm glad they asked it. I'm glad I like your answer, and I threw mine in too, just to offer my point of view on that. So if anybody's wondering, Kevin's not here. Just say yes to everything I say. That would bore the daylights out of all you, and I would not want that. I brought Kevin in here because he represents a different demographic than I am, one that's about half my age and a different experience, and that was the whole purpose of it. I didn't want it to be somebody else my age. That'd actually be worse. It'd be like grumpy old men talking about it. Nobody would want to hear that. But anyway, if you have those questions too, always feel free to ask either Kevin or I or both of us or whatever, if you have anything about that. But it was a good question. So it's been some good questions have come up. I have an interview scheduled for next week's podcast.
Okay.
So if that happens, Kevin won't be here next week, but you'll hear from him again soon. So there you go.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for listening to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast.
We'll talk to you later.
See you, everybody.
Before you go, did you know you can rate and review our Studio 809 podcasts? That will help us because our egos really need to have thousands and thousands of listeners. But that helps our wonderful sponsors reach more ears too. And we do love our sponsors. So just go to Studio 809 or any individual 809 podcast in your iTunes or podcast app and click on ratings and reviews. Thanks.